If equipment is down, ultimately care is down. Like healthcare these days really runs on technology. And to me, that's a solvable problem. AI is a tool that we can now apply, to also help solve this problem. And, with AI, we can transform data that can sometimes be trapped in silos, really into foresight in order to maximize the uptime and ultimately clinical throughput, by maximizing the uptime and the usage of those clinical assets.
Welcome to the Retention Rethink podcast, a new series brought to you by Customer Success Collective and Gainsight. This 4-part mini-series is all about rethinking customer retention and building life cycles that don't just prevent churn, they grow revenue. Each episode, we'll sit down with customer leaders to unpack their stories and share actionable learnings you can use right away. On the show today, we have Brad Casemore, Chief Customer and Growth Officer at PartsSource. Brad, we're so excited to wrap up the series with your take on driving predictable customer outcomes. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Taylor. I'm excited to be here.
Before we get started, and to set the stage a little bit for those who are listening, can you tell us a bit more about PartsSource, your customer profile, and the organization that you run?
Yeah, happy to. At PartsSource, we're committed to raising the quality, availability, and affordability of healthcare. Our mission really is to ensure that healthcare is always on, for patients, right, and consumers of healthcare. So PartsSource really is the leading technology platform for managing mission critical healthcare equipment. We serve over 15,000 clinical sites and 5,000 hospitals across the U.S. With a comprehensive portfolio across not only medical parts, which is where PartsSource started, but as well as service, talent, and then asset capabilities such as asset telemetry, asset uptime, and a portfolio and suite of solutions there as well.
Wonderful. And what has made this role so exciting for you?
What drew me to PartsSource really was the opportunity to solve one of healthcare's most overlooked, I think, but yet foundational challenges. Ensuring that equipment availability is being optimized, right? And if equipment is down, ultimately care is down. Like healthcare these days really runs on technology, and to me, that's a solvable problem. AI is a tool that we can now apply, to also help solve this problem. And, with AI, we can transform data that can sometimes be trapped in silos, really into foresight in order to maximize the uptime and ultimately clinical throughput, by maximizing the uptime and the usage of those clinical assets. And so AI is helping us to be able to unlock, new customer value, through both our technology solutions, and our daily operations. And these opportunities are what got me really excited about PartsSource's mission and being able to kind of bring these capabilities to the organization.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing your connection to the mission. And you better believe we will be talking about AI absolutely today. But before we get there, I want to learn more about the value side of what you just hit on. I know you've talked about you have PartSource really focused on a value creation roadmap for customers. So can you talk to us about how having these roadmaps has shaped your approach to customer success?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, as I think about customers, value is always through the eyes of the customers. And I think organizations' strategies are rapidly changing, right? Ultimately, as you look at the landscape. And so therefore, I think, as a service provider, right, and ultimately as a partner, it's important to understand customer strategies. And then how do you map those strategies to understand what is value to the customer? How do they interpret value? Because it's not the same year over year. And so we've created a process here, at PartSource where, every year we realign with our customers on what are their organizational strategies? How does that translate into departmental strategy? And then what are their biggest challenges? And then in those conversations, we work with them to make sure that, we adjust how we measure the overall success of our partnership. And where are there areas that we can partner, with our customers so that they maybe don't have to bring on a new vendor. Or it could be, how do I help them extend value or adopt features that maybe they aren't using today to help them ultimately achieve their strategic objectives? And so, by doing this, Taylor, I think it's really helped us move from just being another transactional vendor, right, that can provide something to a customer, to really being more of a strategic partner, and a strategic partnership that has visibility and a roadmap to not just help them solve for today's problems, but how do I help them solve for their problems, not only that they face today, but then in 6 months from now, in 9 months from now, and in 12 months from now. And one of the things that we've helped or that we found be really helpful here, Taylor, is they can then also use that as a change management catalyst, right? So that their teams internally don't feel like we're making this change and now this change, but they can more or less show the roadmap of where the partnership's going to go, so that they can use it to ultimately take people on the journey as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So critical to be able to hand our customers and just a bit of a roadmap around change management. But speaking of change management, no doubt this was a major initiative at PartsSource. So for those out there who are curious, gosh, where do we get started with creating a value roadmap? How did you get this initiative started?
Great question, right? Because it all starts ultimately, Taylor, with the data. And I think a lot of organizations get caught up in just trying to find the data. And then, once you get the data, ultimately you can get overwhelmed by it then, right? And so I think it's really important to, first off, understand again, like how the customer interprets value, and what your value prop is in the market. And then what are the various ways that you measure that, and then establish, the operating parameters for what good looks like as well. And once you do that, then you're able to put in place, infrastructure such as like Gainsight that helps you take data, be able to create insights from it, but then also be able to create prescriptive actions. So therefore, you don't have your teams digging around in data and doing all of that. We are handling the data, we're converting it to insights and creating prescriptive actions that have playbooks tied to them, to be able to execute and be able to really, execute at scale without, adding a lot of additional resources to be able to do that. And so those are some of the, tactics and tooling that, we've deployed here at, PartSource to really be able to help, scale these things. And in addition to that, it's then, how do you take those actions and convert it to a meaningful story, right? And a meaningful presentation that you can take out to customers. And so we've made additional investments really in those areas too, which have helped us. And it helps ensure then that every customer interaction is really adding value back to the customer. And it's making sure that our people are well prepared to provide that value to the customer as well. And so those are some of the efficiency things that we've done, Taylor, internally to really be able to help support this vision and objective that we have.
Yeah, that's incredible. So it sounds like there's really a host of resources that is supporting your team. It's not just the data and the insights, but like you said, the enablement to be able to have those large, heavy sometimes conversations with customers. So that's great that you've built that around. The motion that you're talking about, so this value creation and the roadmap and the information being presented back to the customer, it sounds very high touch. I bet a lot of folks listening are thinking, okay, maybe I could do that for 10% of my customers. How are you thinking about scaling it out across your customer base?
Well, it comes back to segmenting your customers. And, nowadays, the customer experience and the way that I've always viewed it is the customer experience should be consistent across the board, right? And, creating that consistent experience really gets into, meeting your customers where they're at and how your customers want to interact with you. And Taylor, not every customer wants to have, a 30-minute or an hour meeting, right? Once a month to go through those things. And so I think you really have to understand your customers, understand the ways that they want to engage and interact with you. And so some of these are, done via email with the customer in terms of being able to get those in place. And others are more involved, right? We cover them during an EBR, right? So an executive business review. And that's the time. And so I think once you put the tooling in place, it's like anything. They become more tools in your toolbox, but then you have to be able to adapt to what is the engagement model with the customer in order to be able to then bring those things, into fruition.
Picture this. Your team just lost a high-value customer. You thought the account was rock solid. in perfect health. So how do you explain the unexpected churn? Everything looked great on paper, right? What if you could see everything, even the signals hiding in plain sight? Staircase AI by Gainsight digs deeper. It finds the emails you weren't CC'd on, highlights an expansion opportunity hiding in support tickets, and flags meetings that seemed great, but maybe weren't. With Staircase AI, every customer interaction is automatically logged and analyzed in real time. You'll get instant alerts for high-risk sentiment shifts, real-time insights into relationship strength, and even visibility and recommendations on how your team is spending their time. You can't find every needle in the haystack on your own, but Staircase AI by Gainsight can. Stay one step ahead of churn.
And I love how you talk about meeting the customer where they are, because you're right. Not everyone needs a call, or maybe they're more complex and they need a few calls to work through it. And so being flexible in that way, I think, is a really powerful way to be thinking about delivering value. And on the value front, I know you've talked about benchmarking and some of the ways that you might compare customers and even provide value in just showing them how they're performing against their peers. So talk to us how you're thinking about benchmarking and your approach to sharing those insights.
Yeah, absolutely. And, benchmarking, I think, is always a powerful tool. People like to know, how are they doing relative to others in the industry? And, PartSource being the position that we're in and having, the large number of hospitals ultimately that we partner with across the nation, allows us to, show customers how do they compare against the best in class. And so, we're able to say, hey, this cohort of customers, which is, identical or similar to you, here's how they're getting value from PartSource. And then how do I benchmark, customers against that? Again, anonymously, right? To help them to show like what is really the art of the possible here in terms of how you'd be able to extend that. But it comes back to kind of the key components as well. And when you want to do that and you want to do it well, it comes back to putting the right technology in place to ultimately to be able to scale it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Has there been an example or maybe a customer story where leveraging benchmarking has, turned into kind of a great outcome for a customer?
Oh, so many. Let me share maybe two, and two kind of opposite stories here. One is where, we had a customer, Taylor, who submitted their cancellation, and that customer ultimately wasn't finding, value in the relationship. And, upon really digging in there, and getting back in front of the customer, helping them understand, kind of the full capabilities of what PartSource can partner with them on, really helped to re-engage that customer. And so there was a customer where we maybe hadn't been engaged or hadn't gotten the visibility or the traction that we wanted to. And after going through that, right, and establishing a value creation roadmap with them, getting over, the hurdles or pain points that they saw in the relationship today, we ultimately turned that customer around, got that customer, to renew. That customer is seeing, better outcomes ultimately from the relationship. And, as a part of that, they've also grown the relationship with us. And so I think it's one of those components where, when you help your customers really get the full value, you gain their trust and they come back to you with more problems and they want your help in terms of solving more problems, which leads into, more organic growth ultimately across the board, which is really the win-win, I think, in the industry. And so that's why our approach has always really been, and my approach has always been like focusing on the value, right, for the customer, and everything else ultimately ends up working itself out. And then on the flip side, Taylor was just actually on a call last Friday, where we were presenting some new benchmarks that we had, with a customer. And, we were going through kind of areas of opportunity, both on how you can better use the core kind of B2B features that we have to be able to better manage your daily operations by understanding when parts and when service are going to occur on site that day, to using our visual analytics capabilities to really drive continuous improvement. And we were showing them how best-in-class customers are using these capabilities to, improve their operations, and then also through how customers are using, the visual analytics capabilities to drive improvement, to ultimately reduce costs, right? Improve efficiency across the board. And that customer at the end of the call, said to us, they said, this is just so powerful, right? And they're like, these benchmarks just mean everything to us in terms of understanding where we aren't getting value. And, we walked away from that call, Taylor, and they had actually had, 10 new technicians who we found out weren't using the platform, right? Because we were able to present those benchmarks right back to them. And so we come up with a plan to get kind of, re-engaged there. Ultimately as a whole with them to help kind of drive better operations. And that's important, Taylor, because what we tell customers is there's this really powerful data-driven and evidence-based flywheel, right? And in order to be able to make better decisions today, we all know that you need good data to do that. And but how do you get that data? Data really starts with high adoption, right? And when you get high adoption, you get a more complete data set. And when you have a more complete data set, you're then able to, ultimately make better decisions. And when you make better decisions, that drives better outcomes for your organization. And so that's kind of that powerful flywheel that we're always talking with customers about, because it does really start with adoption in order to be able to do that. So, just a couple of stories in terms of how we've used this tooling to engage both a customer that's at risk to turn around that relationship, and bring it to an existing customer to help them understand where they aren't maximizing the value ultimately of what they could with the current investments that they're making with us.
Wow. Very powerful stories. And there's two really interesting pieces of that I heard. So first, congratulations. It sounds like you all were just ready for those situations as they came at you, which I think is really powerful. The first thing I heard was having a point of view. In both of those situations, it sounds like your team was able to go in with, they've got the roadmap, they've got, the background on the customer, they've got the benchmarks and the data. You're walking in with a point of view to be able to tell a story to that customer. So powerful versus I know many of us have been in the seat of cancellation notice comes in and we don't know a ton about where we should start that conversation with our customer. So super powerful to be able to walk in with that point of view. And then I also loved what you said about adoption being value back to the organization just by using means you have more data, which means you can make better decisions. So really incredible takeaways from those stories. So thank you so much for sharing that. Well, since we're talking about data, let's talk about our favorite topic, customer health. What are some of the signals, adoption, usage? What else do you look for when you think about customer health?
Customer health. So we use what we call a CLI. So we use customer loyalty index here. Same thing, really similar to customer health, but we like to look at it and we intentionally call it CLIs to say what's that customer's loyalty, right? And how do we ultimately measure the loyalty? And I think that that's important because it plays into how do you measure health? Because traditionally, I think, health is measured by looking at, product adoption. It's being looked at like logins. But Taylor, this is where the power comes up when you know how your customers view outcomes, right? And you know how your customers measure value, then you can make sure that ultimately the way you're looking, what you're using to measure customer health or the customer loyalty index is a reflection of how they perceive value, right? Across the board. And so, I think today into today's dynamic environment, that's important because you can look at surveys, you can look at kind of featured option. I think those are all the things that I would say are above the water, right? And or the iceberg that you can see ahead. But they aren't necessarily the things that are beneath the water. And I think the things that are beneath the water are, again, how the customer perceives value, but also what's the day-to-day interactions like with a customer? Because it's so much more than just the outcomes or how they're using the product. It's, are you providing them the day-to-day experience, right? And is that a good experience? And in an organization like PartsSource, where we've grown both organic and inorganically, all your systems aren't consolidated day one. And so how are you really stitched together that customer experience, right, across those systems so that when you go to get on a call with a customer, you can really understand holistically what their experience is with you as an organization, and not just what you might have visibility to on the surface. And so, Taylor, I think this is another area, right, where AI is just so powerful in being able to, help with that in the interim while organizations are going through, ultimately their transitions. And it empowers our account teams and everybody that's customer facing, to really understand the customer. And what that means is ultimately you're ensuring that like you're prepared and you can provide value in those conversations, and you don't walk into a conversation where it's like, I don't know, like, let me follow up on that. And of course, that still happens, right? You never are fully prepared, but I think it helps make sure your people are better prepared. And they don't have to email 5 people or 6 people to get updates on those things, right? It's more of at the click of a button now, you can see that. And, we've used Staircase AI, right, from Gainsight to actually help us do that. And I think it's been, one of the game changers in terms of things that we've done, this year to really better support our customers and really to better support our people internally too, right? To make sure that they're set up and can proactively manage the customer relationship as well.
Yep. That's incredible. Helping them see around corners. You mentioned the iceberg and getting ahead of what may be lurking under the water. So how are you thinking about seeing those risks and the potential churn before it's wildly obvious?
Yeah. So we use our CLI, right, our health score,
Yep.
and that obviously helps us a tremendous amount, right, in terms of doing it. But I think 2 additional components. One would be using Staircase AI, like I talked about, to really stitch together the experience. And I think an important part of never being surprised is also the concept of like, how do I just be proactive, right? In the terms of the way that I really manage retention, and proactive in every experience. And so with Staircase AI, what we've been able to do is to set up triggers and alerts. And now our teams are actually notified in real time. So if there's a customer experience that doesn't go to our standards or things like that, the appropriate teams are notified via Microsoft Teams, right? And in Microsoft Teams, they can swarm, they can collaborate, and we can reach out and we can do customer recovery. Those are capabilities we didn't have before, right? But now it's real time at the fingertips and it's being pushed to people. So I think those are another one of like the game changing things, ultimately that we've deployed here, to really own the customer outcomes and ensure that the experience, on a day-to-day basis, only continues to get better. And that's on us as an organization, right? And I feel that that's a big part of our purpose, and things that we owe to our customers, right? As a part of our partnership.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I love how you're talking about too, the experience for the customer. Ultimately, we want to take all the friction out. We want to take all the, our mess behind the scenes. We want the customer to get in the right hands as quickly as possible and get it resolved. And so, I think for many listening, we've had those moments of, gosh, is this owned by our team or another team? It sounds like you all have leveraged this capability, like you said, to do more real time, get it in the hands of the team that can solve it and get to a resolution fastest. That's incredible. So on the flip side, we've talked about those risky customers and getting to that fast resolution. How do you keep the momentum going with those already really healthy and loyal customers?
We have a number of tactics. I think our value creation roadmap, right, has been a strong way to do that. And Taylor, when you have trust with customers and you're delivering on the value of the partnership to them, I always say, what do customers do? They come back to you ultimately with more problems and more challenges. And customers say to us all the time, like, I just wish I could do this through PartsSource, right? I just wish that like I could sign a contract with you and you could go manage that vendor for me. And so, Taylor, out of some of those things is how really PartsSource has grown and evolved, right? And I shared at the beginning how, we've got solutions across not just, medical parts, but it's service, it's, talent, and then, ultimately asset technologies as well. And so some of the ways that our portfolio of solutions and offering has grown has been based on that feedback from customers, right? By understanding what are their challenges, and then us going out and both, organically or inorganically bringing those solutions in as a part of our portfolio, so that we can really be that go-to partner, right, for them, in the industry. And Taylor, that's been, a key part of how we've grown. And then how do we bring that back, to the customer? And so I think building the customer experience and to make sure it's strong, making sure you're delivering on and you're able to, measurably make sure you're delivering on the value that you ultimately sold the customer and promised. Those are key kind of foundational elements. And when you do that, customers come back, they engage with you, they want to find ways, right, to ultimately have you help them more. And to me, that's just a part of again, I think I call it like another flywheel effect, right, of saying like, hey, deliver a great experience, and the flywheel just keeps going.
Yep. I love that. And you're getting more data back in the door when they're sharing with you what's on their mind. And you mentioned, the feedback and learning about those other problems that they're trying to solve. That we talk about product feedback a lot in CS, and often that the connotation is it comes from a moment of being not so happy. But in this case, what you're talking about is really unlocking those moments of they're healthy, they want to partner with us even more deeply. Their feedback is now, here's where you could do more for us to work more closely together. So I love that perspective on getting feedback from customers. All right, so we talked about AI and how already you're using it to surface risks and potential opportunities and learning from the information that your customers are sharing with you. How does AI help your team prepare for big customer meetings?
A number of ways. So I share a little bit around, right, how you make sure you understand the customer, right, how we stitch together the information, right, across the board. And so that's been powerful. We use Taylor AI. We use AI in a number of ways in terms of, in meetings, helping us take meeting notes, helping us to, make sure that from those meetings we're gathering action items. And the reason why I bring these things up is because when you do that, you can use tools, and we, of course, we're using Gainsight here again, but it all kind of flows back into Gainsight, right? And what that does is it gives you kind of one place to go to really understand the customer. And, I don't think this is Gainsight's official terminology, but I always call it like the customer intelligence platform, right? Like I want to understand everything that's going on, and that's my mission control center, right? To be able to do that. And, it's powerful when you can stitch that all together and have that in one place, because you get, AI written, summaries, right, across the board. You can use, Copilot that's built into the platform to interact with the data, right, to be able to kind of understand things and ask questions rather than going and emailing people and trying to figure it out. Taylor, I think the other thing is, for big customer meetings, we've also deployed a technology called Matic. And, Matic plugs into, Gainsight ultimately, and it's extracting that material and putting it into a formatted presentation. And as a part of that formatted presentation, we also are applying AI directly on those slides with summaries and key takeaways. And so it really gives the team a starting point to work from to ensure that, we're on brand, that the preparation and information they've done, they don't now have to go take all that, extract it, and, start from scratch. It's like we can give them something that's like 80% of the way there. And I think that's important because as we go throughout our days, and we think about it, hey, how many times are you entering information in this system and then entering information in that system? And then I've got my, meeting notes in OneNote or in my notebook. And then you have a big customer meeting and you're like, I got to block off a day or I got to block off 2 days, right, to prep for this. And instead it's like, hey, if you can put the right tooling, the right processes, the right technology in place in order to be able to capture these things, ultimately, you're then able to make use of that information and do so in a much more automated way, and using AI, right, to help you do that. And Taylor, I think it goes beyond that though, right? Because I think what that allows us to do is to ensure that the team is really spending their time with customers, providing more value to customers and less time internally. So I think, sometimes when people hear AI and you're applying AI for this and you're applying AI for that, and it's like, well, we actually have a responsibility, right, to our customers to be good stewards, right, of ultimately, A, the information, but B, also the investments that we make in terms of the service and value that we provide back to them. And I think by us, continuing to, look at how we become more efficient, only allows us, to ultimately be a better partner and provide, greater value, for the customer, in the end.
Wow, amazing. Well, I can't let you out of here without a quick lightning round around AI. So, you've talked to us a ton about what you've already built and how the team is leveraging it. What's one trend or emerging technology within the AI space that you're most excited about for customer success?
Great question. There's a number of them, and I think there's no shortage of opportunities out there. And I'm sure if I'm like anybody else, you don't go a week without getting 10 different emails around what's happening in the space,
Yep.
and 10 different opportunities and people wanting time to engage.
Right.
And so I think it's an exciting time. And Taylor, I think for us, primarily right now, we've deployed AI internally, right? Really to help our teams, become more efficient. I think we're still getting comfortable with like what's the best way to deploy that externally, right? Put it in the
Mm-hmm.
customer's hands, right? To allow them to leverage it. And I think that's where ultimately we'll look probably next. I still think that there's a number of opportunities internally, but also to say like, how do I now start to look at some of that externally yet? And I don't want to share too many secrets of where I think we might go or what might happen, but I think over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, those will be the areas where we'll look to work with our customers. And Taylor, I think that's another thing about PartSource is we don't ever do things without like working with our customers on it. So we, often when we do things, we have alpha programs and beta programs where we engage customers is really we're here to serve them, right? And as a part of that, we like to engage them on our journeys and the strategies that we ultimately deploy as well.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like you've built just such an incredible experience for your customers. And even more importantly, you're continuously listening as you all walk through this journey. So, congratulations to you and everything that you have built. And, Brad, this has just been such a valuable conversation. You've really shown us how customer success at PartSource is all about tying everything back to outcomes and how AI is helping you scale that vision. So, we thank you so much for sharing these practical insights and stories. I know our listeners will take a lot from this. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. This is part of our Retention Rethink podcast brought to you by Customer Success Collective and Gainsight. You can connect with Brad and with me on LinkedIn, and we'd love to keep the conversation going. Brad, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Taylor. It's been a pleasure.